All right, we are back. What is going on, Colts Nation? And welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Of course, your guys, Cody and Derek, back with another one, guys. Well, guys, we're kind of to that point in the offseason where there's not a ton to talk about around the Indianapolis Colts. In fact, been doing a lot more Pacer stuff recently with the Pacers being in the Eastern Conference Finals. So that's a plug. Go check that out if you haven't already. We're trying to get that channel up and running and little bit more traction there. But, Derek, there still is stuff to talk about when it comes to the Indianapolis Colts. And we've just kind of been through, from a personnel standpoint, a lot of new things happening for the Indianapolis Colts. We've obviously talked about it a lot. But looking forward to the 2025 season, I thought it would definitely be good, as we've done the last number of years, to kind of break this down in kind of two separate videos. And the two videos talking about, the strengths of the Colts and the weaknesses of the Colts looking forward to this upcoming season. So we thought today we would start with the strengths for the Colts. Like, what are some of the things that when you look at the Indianapolis Colts in 2025, you could hang your hat on and say, this is what the Colts are going to do well? Because obviously there's a ton of questions around this team, around the future of a lot of these things on this team. But despite some of the questions, despite some of the concerns, there still are a lot of strengths that we want to highlight as well when it comes to the Colts. So when you're looking at some of the strengths, Derek, I think even though you've made some personnel changes, I think just when you look at what the Colts want to do offensively, it's going to be the offensive line. I mean, you still have, at the end of the day, Bernhard Raimann, who I think is one of the best tackles in the league on the left side. You have Quentin Nelson, who I think is the guard right now in the NFL, and you have Braden Smith, who, when he's healthy, I think he is sneakily a top 10 right tackle in the NFL.
Yeah.
And then you have two young guys. So you still have three of your five core from last year intact here, with two young guys that did play well when given the opportunity last year. So your offensive line, Derek, still has a lot of talent on it. Despite the fact that you're changing some things about it, you still have a lot of talent. You definitely have some depth on the offensive line. And when you're looking at what the Colts want to do offensively, obviously, your franchise quarterback, you want to protect him. But more than that, we know that this Colts tack is going to hinge on Jonathan Taylor. We know the Colts are going to try to establish the run. Jonathan Taylor is going to be the guy. The running game is going to lead the way for the Indianapolis Colts. So the offensive line, the running game, all that stuff, pounding the rock, that is where the Indianapolis Colts offensively, that's where their identity is, and it's where it's been for the last couple of years.
Yeah, I just want to start off by saying happy Memorial Day weekend, everybody. I know for some it may not be such a great weekend, but we do appreciate all those that give their lives to be able to allow us to do what it is that we do. But yeah, going into this for the Indianapolis Colts, no doubt, once again, the offensive line impacting the run game. That is going to be obviously the main preface. The Indianapolis Colts have, for so many years, have always had these really good run games, back even in the Manning era, even though it was considered a pass attack offense. The Indianapolis Colts still found the ability to run the football in those times. It was a time when in the Andrew Luck era, there wasn't as much of a preface on running the football as much. And that, really impacted the Colts offense in a lot of ways. But then once that era went away, the Colts really started going back into what it is that, made them great. And, it started with a rushing attack that could actually work. And obviously, since Jonathan Taylor's been here and with this offensive line led by Quentin Nelson, a lot of things have changed. And the Indianapolis Colts have always been deemed as a run-heavy team, and that is obvious with Jonathan Taylor now. Like you said, Cody, even with some of the changes to the offensive line, I'm not overall concerned that the offensive line is going to drastically see a big impact, because for the most part, Cody, the major changes that you're making to the offensive line, those changes were happening in the middle of last season anyway. And you still saw Jonathan Taylor in the final 5 or 6 games that he played was averaging dang near 100 yards a game rushing the football. So it's not like the people that you're putting in, where you have Tanner Bortolini, who is now going to probably be your center full time, Matt Gonsalves, who's likely going to be your right guard, who was the right tackle for a good chunk of last year anyway. So it's not like these guys are coming in here with no experience. I mean, these guys played for almost half a season or more last year. So, I mean, it's not like you're coming into this with a huge question mark. You're certainly hoping that they can continue to play at the level that they were. And there's plenty of room for improvement. But if, that is what you're going to get, if you're going to get a above average center and a above average right guard, and then the rest of your offensive line stays exactly how you normally have it, you're going to once again have another one of your top offensive line units in the NFL.
100%. 100%. Well, with that, kind of looking at some of the other things for the Indianapolis Colts when it comes to the strengths. And Derek, it's kind of interesting because the last couple of years, I feel like this has become, gradually over the years, the last couple of years, it's gradually become a strength. It was a weakness for a while, right? We looked at the skill positions for the Indianapolis Colts and we said, man, the Colts just need more. When you compare them to some of the other teams, they just need more. They need more. They need another receiver. I feel like we said that for like 3 or 4 straight off seasons, like more receiver help, more receiver help. And this was like the first off season where we didn't say that at all. We said, no, we're good if you don't touch receiver. Colts didn't really do that at all this offseason. And you have your top 4 receivers that you really feel confident in. And I know it was kind of rough at times, especially with, like a guy like A.D. Mitchell, who really struggled in terms of, actually catching the football and stuff like that. But obviously the talent is there. Like we saw the separation, that stuff's there. And at the right now, when you look at it, I mean, he's your number 4 right now. So your top 3 wide receivers. And Derek, I know the Colts don't have like a Jamar Chase or a Justin Jefferson or a top 5 receiver in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how you feel about this, but I do feel like a lot of people have just completely like written off Michael Pittman and have kind of just like almost said, oh, last year was just who he is, not taking into account what he was playing through. That's a significant injury, and the fact that he played through that, it obviously impacted him. And, a guy that I'm not saying he's a top 10 receiver, but I think he's a lot better than a lot of people are giving him credit for. And obviously we know Alec Pierce, the NFL, leader in yards per catch, Josh Downs, what he's done, breaking records already in his first couple years. So it's not like there's this alpha wide receiver right now, but it's a lot of good receivers for this Indianapolis Colts team. And you just added Tyler Warren in the draft, who by all accounts was, the best tight end overall in this class. So, that was your biggest question mark last year in your skill positions was the tight end. You didn't have an alpha. And now you draft Tyler Warren. Again, he needs to play. But you look at it on paper and you say, this is probably the best pure like skill group that the Colts have had in a long time.
Definitely, you got to go back to the Manning era to be able to say that. I would say T.Y. Hilton has the pedigree. I'm not insinuating that he doesn't. And obviously that carries a lot of weight. But it was T.Y. Hilton and there was no one else. It wasn't. There was no one else. He was the offensive unit. You're right. You have a lot more wide receivers here who none of them are all pro guys, or none of these guys are going to probably lead the NFL in reception yards throughout the season. Most of the time, probably because of the quarterback that's throwing them the football, right? And that's kind of where the Michael Pittman argument comes into play. I mean, again, Cody, he had 88 catches for 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns in 2021. He was 75 yards shy of 1,000 yards in 2022 when that offense was historically bad, right? So, I mean, that offense was terrible, and he still had a near 1,000-yard season. 2023, he had his best season as an Indianapolis Colt, had 110 catches for almost 1,200 yards. I mean, he was one of the only go-to guys in that offense, Cody. I mean, Josh Downs had a little bit of an impact that year, but outside of that, AP wasn't getting targeted because Gardner Minshew could never find him, and Jonathan Taylor was hurt sometimes, and you didn't have a tight end available. So Michael Pittman had to be the workhorse. And then last year, when your quarterback position was just in utter chaos, he had his worst season because, and with the injury, as you mentioned, it's why the numbers drastically went down 69 receptions for 808 yards. I mean, it's why it drastically went down the way that it did. So you hope that this year he's going to be healthy again. And, Anthony Richardson ends up, being a semi competent quarterback that, can actually hit a 6'4" wide receiver in the hands, give Michael Pittman a chance. And then we could see those numbers go back up, maybe similar to that 2021 season where he had 88 catches for almost 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns. Now, as far as the argument of, the tight end group, I'm not willing to suggest that the tight end group is now fixed. Obviously, we got to see Tyler Warren play, as you mentioned. But at least the great part is, though, about Tyler Warren is it's not the fact that you just have another tight end that's actually really good. You have a tight end that's like a Swiss Army knife. You can use him in more ways than your traditional tight end. You're going to use him in ways that there's very few tight ends in the NFL that you would ever utilize in the way that Tyler Warren likely gets utilized in a Shane Steichen offense, right? When you get near the goal line, Tyler Warren will likely be in the formation in the backfield, 3rd and shorts, 4th and shorts. Tyler Warren may get some direct snaps, things like that. It's the way that you can differently utilize Tyler Warren that makes him unique, and it makes it a strength because defensive coordinators a lot of times are not going to be able to game plan for something like that. They're going to do their best, but then that allows Shane Steichen to, mess with the minds of the defensive coordinators because you think Tyler Warren might be getting the football on a 3rd and short or a 4th and short, and then, Anthony Richardson peels back and then there's a guy open in the flat and he gets 30 yards because nobody was guarding him. It's things like that. So, yeah, you have a wide receiver core that does a little bit of everything. You have guys that fill the position roles very well. And then you obviously have a tight end that is capable of doing just a little bit of everything and opening up Shane Steichen's offense.
Absolutely. And, the quarterback conversation's for another day, but, we talked about it, before. And when we were kind of debating, okay, who do you take with that first round pick? I brought up and I think you probably agreed with me too, brought up the idea of like, I think you got to do everything you can with that first pick to ensure you give whoever your quarterback is, whether it's Anthony Richardson, whether it's Daniel Jones, like give them no excuses. If they're bad, so be it. But at least from a skill standpoint, you've given them everything that they need to succeed. And if they fail, it's on them. It's not because, you didn't support them the right ways, right? And again, I felt like the Colts at times haven't done that necessarily as great as they could for Anthony Richardson. But given the circumstance you're at right now in 2024, after how 2024 played out and going into this 2025 offseason, I felt like this is what you had to do. You obviously, what you have in your running backs. You added a couple guys there. And then, your tight ends, it's just been a bunch of guys. So you needed that alpha in there. So I do feel like from a skill set standpoint, again, they got to go out there and play, especially the tight ends. But I do feel like on paper, this is the most talented receiver group overall, the most talented skills that you've had in a number of years. I mean, it's not like I said, you don't have even the T.Y. Hilton who led the NFL in receiving yards. You don't have a guy, at least at this point, that's done that. But I think from 1 to 4 in your wide receiver room, and even if you want to throw in a couple other guys, a little bit further down on the roster, and from a tight end standpoint, I think in the overall, when you look at it, it's definitely a very talented group. But again, they got to go out there and perform, and hopefully they help whoever's out there throwing the football to them. But
Right.
yeah, that's a big strength for the Indianapolis Colts there. And then when you flip it over to the defensive side, there's a couple different things the Colts, I think, have here in their favor. When you're looking at the edge group, Derek, there are a number of guys here that really, I think, have a chance to fill out this roster nicely. You have a lot of depth at edge. I mean, you obviously, you have a guy like Leatu Latu entering year 2. You have, Samson Ebukam coming back from that big injury. You still have Kwity Paye on your roster. You drafted JT Tuimoloau. You have Tyquan Lewis, who's always been a role guy, just to name a few. So there's 5 guys right there. That's not even factoring in guys like potentially Adetomiwa Adebaware and Isaiah Land. So, you got a lot of depth here on your defensive line, especially in the edge side of things. Now, interior, that might be a little bit of a different conversation, but strictly when looking at edge, you got a lot of guys here, Derek.
Yeah, no doubt. And, a bunch of them, you got a mixture of veteran experience and young players as well. You got young guys that are looking to make their mark and, try to elevate themselves amongst the NFL. And of course, you got a couple guys that are, still trying to still hang around in the league, trying to hang with the Indianapolis Colts as well. As far as the talent goes for that group, we will just have to see how they do going forward. But no doubt, when you look at just overall the depth of the group and the snaps that can be shared amongst all of them, it definitely can be a strength.
Absolutely. I mean, you don't have, at least at this point, you got some young guys that maybe can become that, but where we currently stand here, end of May 2025, you don't have that number 1 pass rusher that has broken out at this point. So you need that, but strictly from a depth standpoint, you're sitting pretty good right now if you're the Colts. So definitely huge there. We know how much the Colts like to rotate. Again, it'd be interesting to see with, Lou Anarumo, this new defensive staff, how do they kind of change things up from last year? And again, we were tempted to put them on the list even, but just with some of the uncertainty, even though on paper, you definitely think it's going to be an upgrade, it's still going to be to be determined at this point. So, but yeah, certainly when you look at that, there's a lot of guys here that could help you rotate, and maybe even a couple guys that could slide inside on some obvious pass down situations and stuff like that if you need them to, which is definitely good. And then when you look, Derek, talking about another position that, I mentioned a little bit earlier about the skill position, right? And how, at one point we viewed it as a weakness. I think that's a lot in how we viewed the cornerback position after 2024. Because you remember, Derek, we all remember. We talked about it at nauseum last offseason. Are we going to do something? Are you going to address it? We mentioned safety as well. Are you going to do something here to help out this group? Because you're only one injury away from having nobody on in your cornerback room, especially. And what happened? Week 1, Juju Brents goes down, and you have to scramble. You have to go get, and you're fortunate you did find a guy like Samuel Womack off of waivers, who actually turned out to be a pretty decent player for you. But you had to come to that point where you lucked into him. You had nothing. I don't give you any credit for finding him, honestly, because you really were playing with fire last year. And what did the Colts do this offseason? They bolstered it and then some. It's so funny how Ballard does this sometimes. We're a position that's so obvious. We know, we talk about how you need to have depth, and then it comes back to bite him. And then almost the next offseason, Ballard's all right, we're going to make sure it's to the extreme, right, from a depth standpoint. And we saw what the Colts did with Javarius Ward, with drafting, Justin Wally. They went all out on making sure this cornerback room was going to be, number 1, raise the floor of that group with a guy like Javarius Ward. And number 2, you're making sure you're never having to go to waivers to find a starter ever again.
Yeah, you're absolutely right in the aspect of, it is kind of how a lot of GMs will do it. This is not just a Chris Ballard issue. This is a lot of GMs will do this, right? Because their egos a lot of times will get in their way because they're like, oh, I trust myself and my guys to be able to work on the guys that I brought in to make sure that this team gets better. And a lot of times GMs will wait until it's blatantly obvious that the guys that they brought in are clearly not getting the job done. So you have to do something about it. And unfortunately, that's kind of Ben Ballard a lot more than not. You know, he doesn't react until it's blatantly obvious that he screwed up. And then it's like, okay, yeah, I said this last year. Well, I don't mean it anymore. It's time to move on and try something different. And, you know, this is another one of the years where, you know, the injuries happened and then the guys that were there just weren't good enough. And you end up just going ahead and getting a new group of guys. And you brought in 3 different corners this offseason. You brought in Travarius Ward, you drafted Justin Wally, and you got Corey Ballantyne in free agency. No doubt that the Indianapolis Colts are looking to bolster that secondary with not just depth, but also, you know, with the addition of a Travarius Ward that really tells you exactly what the Colts feel about the cornerback room right now. And that, you know, they clearly needed somebody else on the outside to be able to try and lock down the number 1 wide receiver that they're facing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it definitely was a floor-raising offseason, like I said earlier, for this cornerback room because, I mean, let's face it, we talked about it all offseason and even last year. Like, you just didn't have a true number 1 guy that could, you know, shatter receivers, stay with them, be that true lockdown guy. And Javarius Ward has all the makings of that type of guy, especially if he can get back to where he was in 2023. I mean, the sky's the limit for sure. But, yeah, definitely going to be a strength this year because, you know, last year you just lacked that depth. And this year, I mean, Derek, when you kind of look at this, you have Javarius Ward, you have Jalen Jones, you have Kenny Moore. Those are your top 3 right now. We'll throw in Justin Wally, who you just drafted. We'll talk about, you know, a guy like, since he was a starter for the majority of last year, Samuel Womack, that's 5. Juju Brents is coming back from an injury, and you have Corey Ballantyne. So that is 7 corners right there on your roster right now. And I'm sure I'm forgetting one as well. Like, that's how deep it is right now. And, you know, we've talked about it, like how important I think it is to always just have so many corners because it's so easy, you know, for corners to go down. And so I think, like, similar to like even like the lines, I think it's important to have a lot of depth at corner. And the Colts certainly do this year.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be interesting to see what the Indianapolis Colts do with, you know, this entire cornerback room. I mean, obviously, you can only keep so many people, and you know that when the 53 man comes out later on in training camp, we'll obviously know and get a better understanding of it. But I mean, I definitely could say it's going to be probably Ward, Moore, Jones, Brents, and Wally, and then Womack. I think they keep 6 corners, to be completely honest with you, especially knowing that there's going to be a lot less heavy linebacker packages. So there's going to be a lot more corners with Lou Anarumo's type of defense. So you're going to want to have extra corners available to you. So having that 6th corner makes a lot of sense to me.
I honestly wouldn't be shocked also if they kept more corners and maybe they kept less safeties because there's a lot more depth at corner than there is at safety right now for this group. And like you said, with the dime and nickel you're going to be likely playing from what we've heard, it would make a lot of sense that the Colts definitely went really DB focused on their roster construction on the defensive side of things. I mean, we've seen them. Like, nobody thought corner was a need, and the Colts went in the 3rd round and got Justin Wally. So, like, they obviously feel like they need a lot of guys that they can play. And, you know, who knows? You know, could you have 4 or 5 corners that could actually get decent time, which is just crazy. Like, we didn't see that with Gus Bradley at all. But with what Lou wants to do, I wouldn't say it's out of the realm of possibility at all. And for how you attack the offseason, I would think that would definitely be the way you'd want to go in a lot of ways. So will be interesting to see how it does play out. But yeah, guys, I think that does it here for some of the strengths for the Indianapolis Colts. Again, talking about the offensive line, the running game, talk about the skill positions, talk about the depth at edge, and finally round it out by talking about the skill that you added at corner and also just the pure depth of that position as well. But let us know your guys' thoughts here when it comes to the strengths for the Indianapolis Colts heading into the 2025 season. Let us know all those things in the comments down below. If you haven't already, be sure to smash that like button, hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, all that good stuff. But guys, that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, guys, go Colts.